Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find a person who doesn't remember where they were and what they were doing on the 11th of September 2001. The world, of course, watched on as it happened, live on television in complete shock and fear, as two passenger planes flew into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and, of course, another into the Pentagon. It triggered a 20-year war on terror in the Middle East. Tomorrow will mark one horrific anniversary. 2,977 people were killed in New York, including 10 Australians. Joining me now is a man who was in New York City on that fateful day. Lincoln Parker was getting dressed in his apartment when he heard the sound of a jet plane fly overhead. He also works for the Defence Innovation Network and is the chair of the Liberal Party's Defence and National Security Policy Branch. He's got several insights to share with us tonight. Lincoln, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, pleasure, Chris. G'day.
G'day. Set the scene for us. It was a really beautiful morning in New York that day, wasn't it?
Oh, it was an absolutely magic day in New York, Chris. And I was getting up in the morning, getting dressed, as I usually did, to go up to Midtown, which is where I worked. I lived on West 17th Street, which is about a mile or so from the Twin Towers near Union Square. I'll never forget the day. I was standing in front of my mirror, getting dressed, and I hear the loudest jet go over my head that I've ever heard. Now, when you live in Manhattan, you're used to seeing lots of planes in the sky because it's a city of 8 million people. There's a number of airports around. So you're used to seeing lots of planes, but you're not used to hearing a really loud jet noise coming from the north. So the first one came from the north, came over the low-rise building I was in, and I was just stunned. I was like, are you kidding me? This plane, what's going on? It's so low, it must have ditched into the Hudson River. So I finished getting dressed, went outside because I commuted up to Midtown via the Union Square subway. And as I got outside to Fifth Avenue, I just saw ambos, cops, fireys just shooting down to ground zero, which is about a mile away, as I said. And I was thinking, my goodness. And then as I got more of a clear view up to the towers, I saw the towers on fire with stuff coming out the top and all of that stuff. And it was just the most weird situation because at that moment I thought, well, I should still go to work. And so I did. I went and got on the subway. And that's when I was on the subway, and I'm kind of still thinking about it, but it was the early days of mobile phones, and suddenly I hear all of these women screaming in the subway and I'm thinking, why are they screaming? And then I'm sort of putting two and two together. They're screaming about their sons or their daughters or their husbands or their wives or whatever it happens to be that are in one of the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
And so I head up to Midtown, go up to the 35th floor of our offices, and boom, the second one comes in. Our corporate lawyer says, rightio, everybody, shut down, get out of here, there's something wrong, go. So, we all go downstairs. I don't know if you remember, but Rudy Giuliani shut the city down. So you couldn't use subways, you couldn't get a taxi, nothing. So luckily for me, I only lived a 10-minute walk down Fifth Avenue. And so I walked, but there were millions of people streaming off the island, walking over the Brooklyn Bridge and other bridges trying to get home. And I got back to my apartment and I'm thinking, I lived with 3 surgical residents. And so I'm thinking, these guys must be down at ground zero. And they eventually came back and I said, fellas, what's going on? Are there survivors? Because you remember that the press at the time was saying, there could be survivors and all of this sort of stuff. And they just said, mate, there's absolutely no survivors. The only work we've been doing is helping the emergency service guys. Everyone's dead.
Wow.
Everyone.
See, it came in 3 parts, didn't it, Lincoln? We had the first plane, and a lot of people may have thought it was off course. It had engine problems. It went into the building. Maybe that is a possibility. But then when that second plane came, there was a great fear from everyone, knowing that this was deliberate. And then if that wasn't shocking enough, the sight of those 2 towers crumbling to dust was just unbelievable, wasn't it?
Incredible. The fear factor was off the charts, Chris. They came down. Luckily, we had a northerly breeze. So living in Manhattan, the northerly breeze was blowing the smoke away from us. I eventually started getting really bad headaches as the days went on. But you're right, they came down. The fear factor was huge. And I just have to say, having visited New York before Rudy Giuliani and then living in New York City under Rudy Giuliani, he was magnificent. Because I don't know if you remember, but for 3 days from 9/11, George Bush went missing. So I don't know whether they had him up in the sky or in a bunker or something. I mean, he didn't address the nation. Rudy took over. He organised all of the emergency services. He was on the TV constantly consoling people because, as you rightly say, we didn't know what the hell was happening. No. At one stage, he organised for a US aircraft carrier to sit off New York. Now, we couldn't see that. But what they did is they had 4 FA-18s flying over Manhattan, low and slow, just like this, in circles. And I got to tell you, Chris, that actually made me feel really good.
Oh, I bet it did. Tell me now, put your defence hat on and your knowledge of the industry and where we sit today, 20 years on from that day, and our exit from Afghanistan has created the same terrible conditions that we faced just before 9/11 in terms of our fear of terrorism, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, it has. But what it's done is it's also pushed the Taliban into China's hands, who are now funding them. So that makes it also very dangerous. But I think what Australia needs to look at is our clear and present and immediate danger is not the Middle East, it's China.
Right.
So, yeah, we put a lot of systems and a lot of security and, there's a lot of intrusion on our privacy nowadays. And that'll probably help us in terms of terrorist attacks. But yeah, look, you could make the argument that the withdrawal was a debacle, and it absolutely was. Why couldn't they keep 2,500 troops stationed at Bagram Air Base, which Trump had drawn down to, just to keep the peace? I mean, the US has got like 50,000 soldiers in Germany. They've got troops in South Korea at about that same rate. Why couldn't you keep 2,500 troops stuck in Bagram just to keep the peace? But
as we did so often and on so many occasions in Europe after World War II. Okay, let me ask you one more question about China then. I keep hearing from Senator Jim Molan about our lack of weaponry, our lack of hardware, the aggressive attitude of China towards anyone who wants to come and help Taiwan. Do we need to bolster our resources in that area?
Oh, absolutely. We are underprepared. Of course, we're never going to be able to fight a major conflict alone, but there's a lot of things that we can do in the meantime. And that means investing in capabilities that Ben Packham and the Australian mentioned the other day. Yep. It means making sure that we look after our backyard. I mean, look at the Pacific Islands. China is taking over the Pacific Islands. Yep. They're into the Solomon Islands. They've already taken Kiribati, or Kiribati as they call it. If we lose our front line, we're going to be stuck. We'll be cut off. We'll be encircled.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got to leave it there. We've been able to pick your brains on two fronts. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, Chris. Thanks.